The number 911 flashed insistently on the phone screen while Tyler Watson, with his trembling little fingers, hesitated before pressing the dial button. At the age of 8, he already knew the weight of responsibility well. He was the oldest of 3 siblings and, at that freezing January moment in Detroit, the hunger that had been eating away at his stomach for 2 days finally overcame his fear of asking for help. 911. What's your emergency? I haven't eaten in 2 days, Tyler whispered, his childish voice breaking at the end of the sentence. My sister Charlotte is 5, and little Marcus is only 3. They're hungry too. The dispatcher, Regina Martinez, felt her heart squeeze. In 15 years of answering emergency calls, some stories still had the power to devastate her. Honey, can you tell me where you are? Apartment 407, Oakwood Heights, Tyler replied, looking out of the foggy window on the 4th floor. The housing complex, a worn-out building on Detroit's west side, was known to the city's social services as an area of working families struggling to make ends meet. As sirens cut through the frigid city air, Officer Catherine Palmer and her partner, Michael Rodriguez, discussed the case. Catherine, a 12-year veteran of the police force and mother of 2, felt her stomach turn with every additional detail she received over the radio. 3 children alone, no food, no heating, Michael repeated, gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Where the hell are the parents? Apartment 407 revealed an even crueler reality than they had expected. Tyler opened the door, his brown eyes too big for his thin face, wearing 3 overlapping sweaters to combat the cold. Charlotte was curled up on the sofa with a blanket, while Marcus slept restlessly at the other end. Our mom works a lot, Tyler explained, his precocious maturity breaking the officers' hearts. She always leaves food, but this time, she didn't come back last night. I tried calling her, but the phone just goes to voicemail. Catherine examined the empty fridge, noticing only a few expired condiments and a half-empty carton of milk. In the small room, she found receipts for 3 different jobs: cleaning lady during the day, gas station attendant in the afternoon, and telemarketer at night. The name Rachel Watson appeared on all of them. While Michael was coordinating with social services, Catherine found out through some phone calls that Rachel Watson had been found collapsed during her shift at the gas station and rushed to Detroit Medical Center. Preliminary diagnosis: severe exhaustion and dehydration, aggravated by untreated depression. The apartment began to come alive with the arrival of the emergency services. Social workers, paramedics checking on the children, and a team bringing blankets and hot food. Tyler watched it all with a mixture of relief and apprehension, still taking on the role of protector of the siblings. You did the right thing to call, Tyler, Catherine assured him, sitting down next to him as he slowly ate a hot sandwich. You know, sometimes even adults need help. The tears finally came, silently streaming down the boy's face. I just wish he didn't have to work so much, he confessed. Sometimes, when she comes home, she cries thinking we're asleep. The Watson story began to unfold like a painful portrait of modern America. Rachel, widowed 2 years ago after losing her husband to an accident at work, struggled with severe depression while trying to keep her family together. Social Security barely covered the rent, and the 3 low-paying jobs were her desperate attempt to keep her children from being destitute. In hospital, Rachel regained consciousness amid a mixture of panic and guilt. My children, please my children, were her first words as she tried to get up from the hospital bed. Dr. Amanda Chun, the psychiatrist on duty, watched the scene with professional concern. The Watsons case was a glaring example of the flaws in the social support system, where mental health was often neglected in favor of basic survival. Mrs. Watson, the doctor began softly, your children are safe, but now we need to look after you too. The case quickly gained the attention of the local community. Catherine, unable to distance herself emotionally, began to mobilize resources through the police association. Michael activated his contacts in the local church. Regina, the dispatcher who took the first call, organized a food drive. Tyler, in his wisdom beyond his years, had unwittingly exposed a silent crisis affecting thousands of single-parent families across the country. His plea for help, born of the most basic need, hunger, began to weave a web of support that would extend far beyond that cold January night. As night fell over Detroit, Apartment 407 was no longer cold and silent. The children slept in makeshift beds in the living room, under the watchful eye of a social worker. Catherine, before ending her shift, paid one last visit to the hospital, where she found Rachel awake, her eyes red from crying. "Officer," Rachel began, her voice hoarse, "I failed them." "No," Catherine interrupted firmly, "you didn't fail. The system failed you. But now you are no longer alone in this struggle." The snow was starting to fall on Detroit again, covering the city in a white blanket that seemed to want to hide its scars. But some stories need to be exposed, some voices need to be heard, even if they come from an 8-year-old calling 911 because he's hungry. Detroit Medical Center was buzzing with activity as Dr. Amanda Chun finished her initial evaluation of Rachel Watson. The test results revealed more than physical exhaustion. They were the silent testimony of years of neglecting one's own health in favor of family survival. "Mrs. Watson, your cortisol levels are alarming," explained Dr. Chun, adjusting her glasses as she analyzed the results. "Your body is literally screaming for help." Rachel tried to sit up in the hospital bed, but her body protested the movement. The deep circles under her eyes and her calloused hands told the story of countless double and triple shifts. "I can't stay here," she muttered. "I need to get back to my children." "Your children are being well cared for," assured Dr. Chun, placing a gentle hand on Rachel's arm. "Now it's time to let others help you." On the other side of town, Catherine Palmer couldn't detach herself from the case even after her shift was over. In her modest home in the suburb of Warren, she rummaged through a pile of papers spread out on the kitchen table. Welfare forms, mental health support programs, housing assistance information, a bureaucratic maze she was determined to unravel. "Still working?" asked her husband, James, placing a cup of coffee next to her. "You needed to see that apartment, James," replied Catherine, rubbing her tired eyes. 3 children alone, starving. And their mother, she's destroyed trying to keep them afloat. Meanwhile, at the Detroit Welfare Center, social worker Marlene Delgado was conducting a preliminary assessment of the Watson siblings. Tyler stood next to the younger siblings, his eyes attentive to every movement of the adults around him. "Do you have any other relatives we can contact?" asked Marlene gently, watching Charlotte draw with the crayons she had provided. Tyler shook his head. "Dad died 2 years ago. His family lives in Texas, but we've never met them. And Mom, she doesn't talk much about her family." Marlene made some notes, her heart squeezing as she realized the complexity of the situation. The system was designed to protect children from abuse and neglect, but cases like the Watsons fell into a gray area. A mother who desperately loved her children, but was being crushed by the weight of poverty and untreated mental illness. At the police station, Michael Rodriguez dedicated his lunch break to making phone calls. His brother, who owned a small grocery store in Dearborn, had already committed to providing groceries for the family. His wife, a teacher at the local elementary school, was organizing a collection of clothes and school supplies. "It's like everyone wants to help, but no one knows where to start," Michael commented to Regina, the dispatcher who had received the first call. Regina nodded, still affected by Tyler's frightened voice on that call. "Sometimes we need a child to show us what's wrong right under our noses." At the hospital, Rachel was beginning to process the events of the last 48 hours. Dr. Chun had started treatment for depression and was coordinating with a multidisciplinary team, a social worker, an occupational therapist, and a financial advisor. "Mrs. Watson," began the financial advisor, Carl Bennett, "there are government assistance programs that you qualify for. Programs that could have saved you from having to work 3 jobs. Rachel hugged her knees against her chest, a posture that made her look as vulnerable as her own children. "I was so afraid to ask for help," she confessed. "Afraid that they would see me as an incompetent mother, that they would take my children away." At the welfare center, Tyler was finally able to sleep, exhausted after days of constant worry. Charlotte and Marcus had fallen asleep hours before, their bellies full for the first time in days. Marlene watched the children sleeping as she typed up her report. The words on the computer screen seemed inadequate to capture the complexity of the situation. Case number 2374. Watson family. Urgent need for multi-sector intervention. Recommendation to maintain family unit with intensive support. Catherine, who had returned to the center after her shift, checked on the children one last time before leaving. Her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Dr. Chun informing her that Rachel had finally agreed to accept professional help. "It's a start," Catherine muttered to herself, wrapping Tyler tighter in a blanket. Night was advancing over Detroit, and in different parts of the city, a safety net was beginning to form. At the hospital, Rachel was finally able to sleep soundly, aided by adequate medication. In the care center, three brothers slept safely, their worries momentarily forgotten. In homes scattered around the city, people like Catherine, Michael, and Regina were planning ways to help a family that, until 24 hours ago, was just another statistic in America's social crisis. The Watson story was far from over, but now there was hope, a rare commodity on the cold streets of Detroit. A hope born of the courageous act of an 8-year-old boy who, in his desperation, found the strength to ask for help. In the silence of the night, the city continued its relentless pace, but something had changed. A small flame of compassion had been lit, reminding everyone that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of courage. Morning arrived at Detroit Medical Center with news that shook the medical team. Rachel Watson had tried to leave the hospital in the early hours of the morning, in a moment of desperation and confusion. Dr. Chin found her crying in the third-floor hallway, shaking and muttering about needing to get back to work. "Mrs. Watson," the doctor gently held her shoulders, "you're not trapped here, but you need to understand that this cycle needs to be broken." Meanwhile, in the social care center, Tyler woke up startled, his eyes immediately searching for his siblings. Charlotte and Marcus were still sound asleep in makeshift beds. A different social worker was on duty, Lisa Kendrick, a middle-aged woman with decades of experience in complex cases. "Good morning, Tyler," Lisa smiled, offering a cup of hot chocolate. "Sleep well?" The boy just nodded, his eyes fixed on the window. Lisa recognized the look. It was the same one she saw in children forced to mature too quickly, carrying responsibilities beyond their years. Catherine Palmer arrived at the center early that morning, before her shift had even started. She was carrying a thick folder with documents and a plan she had drawn up during the night. Her husband, James, a university professor of social work, had helped her identify available programs and resources. "We need a holistic approach," Catherine explained to Michael, who had also arrived earlier. "It's no good just solving the immediate issue of hunger or housing. We need to create a sustainable support network." At the hospital, Dr. Chun was conducting a multidisciplinary team meeting. Watson's case had become a priority, not just because of the seriousness of the situation, but because of what it represented in terms of systemic failures. "Rachel shows clear signs of major depressive disorder," the psychiatrist explained. Her husband's death was the initial trigger, but financial pressure and social isolation significantly aggravated her condition. Sandra Martinez, a social worker at the hospital, gave her assessment. Her husband's insurance was mismanaged due to a lack of proper guidance. There is a death pension that was never properly claimed, and social benefits that could have considerably eased the family's financial burden. In apartment 407 at Oakwood Heights, a small team of volunteers, organized by Michael Rodriguez, worked to make the space more livable. The heating was fixed, the pantry restocked, and various basic repairs were being carried out. "It's amazing how small changes can make such a difference," commented one of the volunteers, installing a new lock on the front door. Tyler, accompanied by Lisa, was allowed to visit the apartment to pick up some clothes and personal belongings for his siblings. His eyes widened when he saw the changes. "It's different," he said, touching the now working radiator. "Things will get better, Tyler," Lisa assured him. "But it's going to take time, and it's okay to need help during this process." At the police station, Regina was organizing the donations that were starting to arrive. The Watson story had touched a sensitive nerve in the community, exposing a reality that many preferred to ignore. Local businesses, churches, and ordinary citizens were mobilizing to help. "We need to turn this wave of solidarity into systemic change," Regina observed, sorting through clothes and food. "How many other Watson families are there in Detroit?" Rachel, after an intense therapy session, was beginning to process years of repressed trauma. The death of her husband, the sudden responsibility of raising 3 children alone, the constant fear of failure. all emerged in painful waves of recognition. I used to be a teacher, she revealed to her therapist, Dr. Morgan. Before children, before everything. But after David died, nothing made sense anymore. Part-time jobs seemed safer, more manageable. At the local elementary school, Principal Andrea Foster met with Catherine to discuss the children's academic situation. Tyler, despite his circumstances, was maintaining surprisingly good grades. Charlotte was in kindergarten, and her teacher had noticed signs of anxiety in recent weeks. We could implement a special support program, Andrea suggested. Psychopedagogical support, guaranteed meals, after-school tutoring. These children need stability. In the afternoon, Catherine visited Rachel in hospital. She found her calmer, leafing through a photo album that Lisa had fetched from the apartment at her request. Here, Rachel pointed to a photo, was Tyler's first day at school. David was so proud. He was sure our son would be a scientist. Her hands trembled slightly. How could I have let things get to this point? Mrs. Watson, Catherine sat down next to her. You didn't let it. You fought alone for too long, carrying a weight that no one should have to carry alone. Now it's time to let others help carry it. At the welfare center, Charlotte finally asked the question everyone had been dreading. When are we going to see Mom? Tyler hugged his sister, once again taking on the role of protector. Lisa observed the interaction, making mental notes about the family dynamic. It was crucial to keep the bonds between the siblings strong during this period of transition. Night fell over Detroit, bringing with it a light rain that washed the streets. At the hospital, Rachel slept more peacefully, aided by adequate medication. At the center, the Watson children took part in an art therapy session, their worries momentarily forgotten amid the colors and papers. Before ending her shift, Catherine once again reviewed the action plan she had developed. It was ambitious but necessary, a pilot program that could serve as a model for other similar cases. Maybe, she thought, from this family's pain something bigger can be born, something that will help prevent other families from going through the same thing. The city continued its nightly rhythm, indifferent to the dramas unfolding inside it. But in the meeting rooms, at the planning tables, and in the hearts of those involved, a silent revolution was underway. One that began with an 8-year-old boy's plea for help and now promised to reach far beyond the confines of apartment 407. Catherine's cell phone alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but she was already awake, reviewing notes on the Watson case. A week had passed since Tyler's 911 call, and changes were beginning to take shape, although the road ahead was still long. I need you to look at this, Catherine told Dr. Chen, holding out a document during her morning visit to the hospital. It was a detailed proposal for a pilot program of integrated support for single-parent families in crisis, using the Watson case as an initial model. Rachel, who was sitting by the window of the hospital room, watched the city go by outside. A week of proper treatment had brought some color back to her face, but her eyes still carried the weight of unresolved concerns. I managed to get an audience with the city council, Catherine continued. They want to discuss implementing a more comprehensive support program for cases like yours, Mrs. Watson. At the social work center, Tyler was helping Charlotte with her impromptu homework. Lisa had established a routine for the children, including study times and recreational activities. Marcus was playing with colored blocks on the carpet, under the watchful eye of a volunteer. You know, Tyler said to Lisa during a break, Mom used to help us with our homework every night, even when she was really tired. His voice betrayed a mixture of pride and concern. Michael Rodriguez was coordinating the last phase of the renovations in apartment 407. The community had mobilized in a surprising way. A local businessman donated new appliances, a furniture store provided suitable beds for the children, and a group of mothers from the neighborhood organized a rota to provide home-cooked meals. It's amazing how a story can bring people together, Michael commented to Regina, who was visiting the apartment to document the changes. But the real challenge will be to maintain that momentum when the spotlight goes down. In the hospital meeting room, the multidisciplinary team discussed the next steps. Dr. Chun presented the evolution of Rachel's condition. The medication is working, but the most important component has been the psychological support and the reassurance that her children are safe. Sandra Martinez, the hospital's social worker, shared updates on the financial situation. We were able to regularize her husband's death pension. Also, a pro bono legal clinic is helping with outstanding labor issues from previous jobs. Catherine received an important call during her patrol. The local school had approved a special mentoring program for the Watson siblings. We want to make sure the children don't miss the school year, explained Principal Andrea. Especially Tyler, who shows remarkable academic potential. In the afternoon, Rachel had her first supervised visit with the children. The meeting, monitored by mental health professionals, was full of emotion. Marcus ran into his mother's arms, while Charlotte couldn't hold back her tears. Tyler, ever the protector, remained distant at first, but gradually drew closer. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered, hugging all three of them. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you needed help before." "It's okay, Mom," Tyler replied, his voice breaking. "There are people helping us now." At the end of the day, Catherine presented her proposal at a preliminary meeting with members of the city council. "The Watson case is not unique," she argued. "It's just the most visible at the moment. How many other families are silently falling apart as we speak?" The presentation included alarming statistics about single-parent families in Detroit, rates of untreated depression, and the impact of financial stress on mental health. "We need a preventative approach," Catherine emphasized. "We can't wait until an 8-year-old needs to call 911 because she's hungry." The council listened attentively, particularly impressed by the integrated intervention model that Catherine proposed, a collaboration between health services, social care, schools, and the police force. Meanwhile, at the social work center, Lisa was conducting a group therapy session with other families in a similar situation to the Watsons. Rachel participated remotely via video conference from the hospital, her presence serving as a powerful testimony to the importance of asking for help. "I thought being strong meant coping on your own," Rachel shared. "But true strength lies in recognizing when you need support." Night was approaching, and Tyler watched the city's movement from the center's window. Lisa noticed his pensive expression and sat down next to him. "What are you thinking about, Tyler?" "How things can change so quickly," he replied, surprising her with his maturity. "A week ago, I was so scared. Now I'm still worried, but it's different." Lisa smiled, realizing the depth of that remark. Within a week, an entire community had mobilized, systems were questioned, and changes were beginning to take shape. All because one boy had the courage to ask for help. In the hospital, Rachel fell asleep holding the drawing Charlotte had made during the visit, a colorful house with 5 smiling figures. Her 3 children, and a bright sun in the sky. It was an image of hope, a vision of the future that now seemed possible. The city continued its nocturnal rhythm, but something had fundamentally changed in Detroit. A collective consciousness had awakened, reminding everyone that communities are built not just of buildings and streets, but of people looking out for each other. The Detroit City Council was in special session that Thursday morning. Catherine Palmer, still wearing her police uniform, was presenting the preliminary results of the Watson pilot program to a room full of elected officials and community members. "In just 2 weeks," she explained, projecting graphs on the screen, "we have identified 47 more families in a similar situation to the Watson in our district. Single-parent families struggling with untreated depression, poverty, and social isolation." In the front row, Michael Rodriguez and Regina watched with pride as their colleague turned a personal tragedy into a catalyst for systemic change. The Watson case had become a turning point in the discussion about mental health and social support in Detroit. At Detroit Medical Center, Rachel attended her first group therapy session. The circle of chairs included other solo mothers, each carrying their own version of exhaustion and guilt. "I spent so much time trying to be strong," Rachel shared, her hands clutching a tissue, "that I forgot what it was like to ask for help. It took my 8-year-old son to do it for me." Dr. Chun, observing the session, took detailed notes. Rachel's progress was remarkable, but fragile. Severe depression doesn't disappear in a few weeks of treatment, and the real test would come with a transition back home. At the Welfare Center, Tyler was participating in a new mentoring program created especially for children in situations similar to his own. His mentor, Marcus Rivera, a 22-year-old psychology student, had grown up in similar circumstances. "You know, Tyler," Marcus said during a game of chess, You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders. It's okay to be just a kid sometimes. Tyler moved his horse thoughtfully. But what if they need me? Your family will always need you, Marcus replied. But now you have a whole support team. Lisa Chun, only 3 months after her rescue, was already showing the same strength that characterized her mentor. Bring her in, Rachel decided. But first, we need to make a stop at Baltimore High. The drive to the school was silent. Rachel drove with determination, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Amanda watched the profile of the woman next to her, marveling at her composure in the face of such devastating revelations. In the school parking lot, they met Agent Torres and her team. The operation had been meticulously planned to minimize the impact on the students. It was lunchtime, and most of the students would be in the cafeteria. He's in the maintenance room, Torres informed them, adjusting his bulletproof vest. As usual, Rachel insisted on being present during the arrest, despite Amanda and Torres' protests. He needs to see my face. He needs to know that I survived, that I became stronger, and that I'm here to stop him from hurting anyone else. The underground corridor was quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Rachel stopped in front of the maintenance room door, painful memories flashing through her mind like lightning. This is where it all began. Seemingly innocent conversations with an adult who seemed to care, offers of help that hid dark intentions. Torres gave the signal, and the FBI team sprang into action. Robert Caldwell, at 58, offered no resistance. His eyes widened as he recognized Rachel, and for the first time in 8 years, she saw fear in the face of her tormentor. "Rachel Bennett," he murmured as the officers handcuffed him. "You were always the one who got away." "No," Rachel replied, her voice firm. "I'm the one who came back to finish you off." News of the arrest spread quickly through the school. Principal Rodriguez organized an emergency assembly, where Rachel, Amanda, and Agent Torres explained the situation to the students and teachers, emphasizing the importance of recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior. Hours later, in the auditorium of the Department of Education in D.C., Rachel shared her full story for the first time. Lisa Chun sat in the front row, along with Catherine, their presence a living testament to the impact of the program. Human trafficking doesn't just thrive through violence, Rachel explained to the packed room of educators and legislators. It thrives through silence, institutional neglect, and our unwillingness to see what is right in front of our eyes. Amanda watched her former student with pride and admiration. Rachel's every word carried the weight of lived truth. Her every gesture conveyed the urgency of her mission. The girl who once coded distress calls into knocks against a school desk now commanded the attention of some of the most influential people in the American education system. "Today, we arrested a man who spent 8 years hiding in plain sight," Rachel continued. "But real change won't just come from arrests and rescues. It will come from prevention, education, and our collective willingness to see, hear, and act." The program was unanimously approved. From the next school year, it would be implemented in all the country's public schools. A small step for a gigantic system, but a significant step in the right direction. That evening, as the rain continued to fall on Washington, Rachel, Amanda, Catherine, and Lisa shared a silent meal in a small restaurant near Capitol Hill. 4 women united by tragic circumstances, now working together to rewrite the future. For those who survived, Rachel raised her glass of water. And for those we're still going to save, the hall at Baltimore High School was decorated with colorful banners and posters celebrating 2 years of the national program to prevent human trafficking in schools. Rachel Bennett adjusted the microphone as she surveyed the hundreds of faces in front of her: educators, social workers, survivors, and, most importantly, students who now knew the signs and how to ask for help. "When I sat in this very auditorium as a student, I never imagined that one day I would be here as a speaker," Rachel began, her voice calm and steady. "Much less that I would be celebrating a program that has saved more than 200 lives across the country." Amanda Wilson, sitting in the front row, smiled encouragingly at her former student. Next to her, Lisa Chun, now a freshman at the University of Maryland and a volunteer at the Protection Center, held a notepad. In the back rows, Catherine Mills accompanied a group of her current students. all wearing purple t-shirts with the slogan, "Your eyes can save lives." "But today I'm not just here to celebrate numbers," Rachel continued. "I'm here to announce the next step in our journey." A murmur of anticipation ran through the auditorium. In recent months, rumors about a significant expansion of the program had circulated through the corridors of power in Washington. The Department of Education has approved the creation of the first National Center for Training and Research on Preventing Human Trafficking in School Settings, Rachel announced, her voice shaking slightly with restrained emotion. "And it will be built right here in Baltimore, on the land where the warehouse that served as a captivity for so many victims once stood." The audience erupted in applause. Amanda felt silent tears run down her face as she watched her former student on stage. The contrast between the frightened teenager of years ago and the strong woman who now commanded everyone's attention was living proof of the power of transformation. "This center," Rachel continued when the applause died down, "will be more than a building. It will be a symbol of how we can transform places of pain into spaces of healing and prevention." And to lead our research and development team, I'd like to introduce our newest academic director, Dr. Amanda Wilson. Amanda froze in her seat. This was the first time she had heard about her appointment. Rachel smiled and extended her hand towards her, inviting her up to the stage. With hesitant steps, Amanda joined Rachel on stage. The two women embraced, and in that moment, the cycle of guilt and redemption that had begun one fall afternoon years ago was finally complete. "Dr. Wilson," Rachel explained to the audience, "represents something crucial in our mission: the ability to learn from past mistakes and turn them into tools for a better future." In the weeks that followed, the design of the center began to take shape. The architects incorporated therapeutic elements into the design, creating spaces that promoted healing and learning. The main building would include an interactive museum dedicated to educating visitors about the signs of human trafficking, a specialized library and classrooms equipped with state-of-the-art technology. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, Rachel, Amanda, and Lisa visited the construction site. The late afternoon sun painted the Baltimore sky in golden hues as they walked through the grounds that had once witnessed so much suffering. "It's strange to be here," Lisa commented, her hand unconsciously touching the small scar on her wrist. "But it's also liberating." Rachel nodded, understanding perfectly what her young protege meant. "Sometimes we need to face our ghosts to truly free ourselves from them." Amanda looked at the two survivors who had become examples of resilience and transformation. "Do you know what impresses me the most? How you've managed to turn your most traumatic experiences into something that benefits other people." "It's like that story about the Japanese garden," Lisa replied, surprising the two older women, "where the cracks are filled with gold. Our scars haven't made us ugly. They've made us more valuable, more capable of helping others." The sound of construction machinery in the background created a strange symphony of progress. In a few months, that space would be filled with the voices of educators learning to identify danger signs, of survivors sharing their stories, of researchers developing new prevention tools. "I receive an interesting report today," Rachel commented as they walked back to their cars. "Since we implemented the national program, there's been a 47% reduction in confirmed cases of trafficking in school environments. And a 300% increase in reports," Amanda added. "Because now people know what to look for, and more importantly, they know what to do when they find it." Rachel's phone rang. It was Catherine Mills. Yet another case had been identified at her school, but this time, thanks to the training, the intervention took place before the worst could happen. A second grader had recognized the signs in her best friend and sought help immediately. "This is how we break the cycle," Rachel said after hanging up. "One person at a time, one story at a time, until there is no more silence, until there are no more invisible victims sitting in the back of classrooms." The sun finally set over Baltimore, but the lights on the construction site continued to shine, symbolizing the hope that would never fade. The National Training Center would be more than a building. It would be a beacon, guiding educators and communities into a future where no child would have to encode their cries for help in silent knocks against a school desk. Rachel, Amanda, and Lisa stood there for a few more moments, watching the workers finish another day of construction. Each carried their own scars, their own stories of pain and overcoming. But together they had created something greater than their individual experiences, a legacy of protection, prevention, and hope that would continue far beyond their own lifetimes. For the future, Rachel whispered, her words carried on the soft night wind. To the future, Amanda and Lisa replied in unison, their voices blending with the last sounds of the ending day, marking not an end, but a new beginning.